The sun had just risen over New Delhi, casting a golden light across the massive stage built in the heart of India's technology hub. A crowd had gathered: ministers, scientists, students, journalists, all waiting to witness the moment when Sundar Pichai, the CEO of Google, would receive one of the country's highest honors. It was not just any award. It was meant to celebrate a lifetime of innovation, humility, and leadership. People believed he would walk up with that familiar calm smile, accept the award, and inspire the next generation with a few powerful words. But something strange was happening. As the master of ceremony finished announcing Sundar's name, the camera zoomed in on him. He stood up slowly, adjusted his suit, looked around at the crowd, and then he sat back down. A low gasp spread through the audience. The applause faded into silence. Narendra Modi, seated just 2 rows behind him, leaned forward slightly, watching Sundar with focused eyes. Ministers exchanged confused glances. The air felt heavy. For a full minute, nobody moved. Then Sundar Pichai stood again, but not to accept the award. He took the microphone, walked to the front of the stage, and spoke in a voice that was calm, but full of emotion. "Thank you for this honor," Sundar said, "but I cannot accept it today." The silence broke into whispers. Cameras clicked. Even the foreign press leaned in. "Many years ago," Sundar continued, "I made a promise to myself. It was not about awards or recognition. It was about something more personal. Something I haven't spoken about publicly until now." His voice did not tremble, but there was a pause that made every heart beat louder. "There was a letter," he said. "A letter written to me by someone whose name you wouldn't recognize. Not a leader, not a billionaire. Just a woman who worked in a small government school in Tamil Nadu." People leaned forward. "She wrote to me when I became CEO of Google," she said. "We are proud of you, but don't forget to come home, not just for a visit, but to lift those who are still in the shadows you rose from." He looked down for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "That letter changed something in me. I kept it with me all these years, but I never responded. I never found her, and I never returned in the way she hoped I would." The crowd was completely silent. Even the air felt like it had stopped moving. "How can I accept an award from the country I love?" Sundar asked softly, "when I feel like I failed one of its voices, the kind we don't hear often enough?" People didn't know what to do: applaud, stand, speak. Nobody moved. And then, from the edge of the stage, Prime Minister Narendra Modi slowly stood. He walked up to Sundar, not as a politician, but as a man who understood something deeper. He didn't take the mic. Instead, he leaned toward Sundar and spoke quietly, only a few words. No one heard what he said, but Sundar's eyes widened slightly, not in shock, but in recognition. He looked directly at the Prime Minister, then slowly nodded. Modi stepped back, and Sundar looked out at the crowd again. "I will not accept the award today," he said, "but I will earn it. I will return. I will find her, and when I have done what she asked of me, I will come back, not for applause, but for her." The audience stood, not in celebration, but in deep respect, and just like that, Sundar Pichai stepped off the stage, not as a tech leader, not as a celebrity, but as a man on a quiet mission, one that no one had expected him to take. But everyone felt they understood. In the front row, Modi remained standing, watching Sundar disappear into the crowd. He had whispered just one thing into Sundar's ear, and that one thing had changed everything. The next morning, headlines across India exploded with the same image: Sundar Pichai walking off the stage, while the Prime Minister looked on in silence. Social media couldn't stop talking about it. News anchors debated what Modi had whispered to him. Hashtags like #WhyHeLeft and #SundarReturns trended across the world. But Sundar himself stayed silent. He had already left New Delhi before the sun rose. There was no press conference, no statement, no interview. He got on a quiet flight, heading south to Chennai, and from there, a small car took him into the rural stretches of Tamil Nadu. His only luggage was a simple leather bag. Inside it, the same letter he had received years ago, the one written by the school teacher, whose name he had never forgotten, Lakshmi. He opened it again as the car bumped along a dusty road. Dear Sundar, we are proud of you. Not because of where you live now, but because you were one of us once. We still teach under trees here. Our computers barely start, but we speak your name when our children lose hope. If you ever remember us, come not for ceremony, but to remind us that dreams don't die in dust, they grow through it. He closed the letter, folded it with care, and looked out the window. Trees passed slowly. Distant hills stood still. Children walked to school barefoot, some carrying torn books. Finally, the car stopped in front of a cracked building with faded blue walls. It was the same school he once attended for a short time as a child. The paint was peeling. The gate creaked, but the bell still rang sharp and honest. He stepped out quietly. A young boy playing near the entrance saw him first. He froze, eyes wide, and ran inside. Within minutes, students began peeking through windows. A teacher stepped out, wiping her hands on her sari. Her face froze in disbelief. Are you really Sundar Pichai? She asked, as if afraid the question itself might disappear. He nodded, smiled gently, and said, I'm looking for someone. Lakshmi, miss. The teacher's smile faded. She stepped closer and touched his hand. Sir. She passed away 3 years ago. We lost her during the rains. She never left this school, even when her health got worse. She used to talk about you, all the time. Sundar didn't speak for a while. He looked down. His hands trembled slightly. Was she, happy? He finally asked. The teacher smiled through her sadness. Yes, because she believed you would. Come. She said you'd remember her, one day. His eyes burned, but he didn't cry. Instead, he looked around at the building, the students, the walls that had seen both laughter and decay. Can I see her classroom? He asked softly. She led him to the oldest block. There was no fan, no proper chairs, just wooden benches, chalkboards, and light pouring through broken windows. But on one wall, faded and cracked, was a picture of Sundar himself, cut from a newspaper, placed inside a plastic sheet, and stuck there with glue. Below, it was a handwritten quote. One day, he'll come back, and we'll remind him who he really is. Sundar sat down on one of the benches, and in that moment, everything he had worked for, Silicon Valley boardrooms, global meetings, tech innovations, felt far away. This was the place where it had all started, and now, it was the place where he would begin again. After a long silence, he turned to the teacher. How many students do you have? Almost 90, she said, but we only have 2 working computers. Internet is weak. Electricity cuts off every few hours. He nodded slowly. Can I meet them? The next hour changed everything. He didn't give a speech. He didn't talk about Google. He just sat with the children, asked them questions, listened to their dreams. One girl said she wanted to be a scientist. Another boy said he wanted to build robots. One child quietly said he just wanted clean water in his village. Sundar took out a small notebook and began writing. He wasn't taking notes. He was making a plan. Later that evening, as the sun turned orange and the sky began to dim, he walked outside and looked at the broken school sign. He took out his phone, dialed a number, and said just 3 words. We start here. On the other end, a voice answered. Understood. Full support. Sundar Pichai had just triggered something much bigger than a school visit. This wasn't about one award anymore. It was about honoring a teacher's quiet legacy by lighting up the futures of children still waiting in silence. And somewhere deep in the hills of Tamil Nadu, the wind whispered Lakshmi's name. 3 weeks later, the little school in Tamil Nadu no longer stood forgotten. Workers arrived before sunrise. Trucks brought materials. Local engineers and volunteers began clearing broken walls and laying new wires. Internet cables were pulled through the trees like veins, reconnecting to a sleeping heart. New computers arrived, each packed with learning software, translation tools, and interactive lessons coded in both Tamil and English. But Sundar didn't just send the help, he stayed. He had postponed his return to the United States. No press knew where he was. He refused interviews, declined conferences, and canceled meetings. He was back in the same place where he had once sat cross-legged with a torn notebook and a dream, too fragile to speak out loud now. Every morning, he arrived at the school early, notebook in hand, watching the transformation. He didn't act like a CEO. He sat in the dirt with the children, helped them set up tablets, and asked them what they wanted to learn. But something deeper was happening. The children started changing. A girl named Kavya, who once sat in the back of the class and never raised her voice, now read aloud with confidence. A boy named Arun, who had stopped coming to school after his father lost work, returned every day after Sundar visited his home and promised to get him solar-powered internet for studying. And in the middle of all this, Sundar added something to the wall of the school, a plaque. It read, "Lakshmi, Miss, you never gave up. Now neither will we." The villagers began noticing more. Local farmers came in the evenings to learn digital tools. Mothers gathered to ask about online learning for their daughters. One woman held Sundar's hand with tears in her eyes and said, "My child now speaks in English. I don't understand it, but I know it means something." But behind all this growth, Sundar carried something he had not shared with anyone, not even the teacher who now worked beside him every day. It was what Narendra Modi had whispered in his ear on the stage. "She wrote to you a second time, and I have it." That second letter had never reached Sundar, not until Modi handed it to him personally, folded in a small envelope with one line on the front, in case he forgets. He had read it quietly in his hotel room that night, after walking off stage. "Dear Sundar, if you are reading this, it means you returned, not to prove something, not to impress anyone, but to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. Don't wait for permission to do what your heart already knows. Just begin, and know that wherever I am, I'll be proud." He never read that letter to anyone, but it lived in his steps. Every project he started, every student he helped, every corner of the village he visited, it was all guided by her voice. News eventually reached Delhi. The media caught wind of what was happening. A few reporters arrived, expecting to film a tech CEO doing charity, but what they found was different. They saw children coding apps in local language. They saw villagers using mobile phones to check crop prices and plan farming schedules. They saw a generation waking up. The story exploded on every platform. Headlines read, "From Silicon Valley to schoolyard, Sundar's quiet mission, and the CEO, who refused an award, but built a legacy instead." But, even as the world watched, Sundar avoided the spotlight. He was focused on a bigger vision now. One day, during an afternoon class, he stood under the same tree where he once studied with Lakshmi. Students gathered around. The breeze was soft. The air smelled of chalk and promise. He looked at the children and said, "I'm not your teacher, but I'm here to remind you that you matter. Not just one day, but every day. And one day, you'll remind someone else." A small girl raised her hand and asked, "Sir, are you going to build more schools like this?" Sundar smiled and answered, "Not just schools. I'm going to build bridges. Between villages and cities. Between dreams and chances. Between silence and voice." From that day, they began calling the project the Lakshmi Initiative. And it didn't stop in one village. Sundar used his own resources to start similar projects in 5 other rural districts. He partnered with small local foundations. No branding, no logos, no photos, just a single mission: make sure no child ever has to leave their dream behind, just because the world forgot their name. But then came the unexpected call. It was from the Prime Minister's office. Narendra. Modi was inviting Sundar back to the same stage. Not for another award, but to share what he had done. This time, Sundar didn't hesitate. He looked around the school one last time, packed his notebook, and boarded a train alone, quietly, and with one more message left to give. Because the next stage wasn't about honoring him, it was about honoring someone else. The day Sundar Pichai returned to Delhi, the air felt different. The same stage had been rebuilt, not for ceremony, but for something else, something no one could quite name. The invite was not public. No giant banners, no awards lined up. The government had kept it low profile on purpose, but word had spread. Not through posters or press, but through students who had written their first lines of code. Farmers who had seen their incomes rise through digital tools. Mothers who had watched their daughters stand taller in classrooms. They came not for applause, but to witness something they felt part of, and so. By the time Sundar arrived at the open-air event center, the seats were full, not with dignitaries, but with teachers, students, social workers, old men from dusty villages, girls in bright uniforms holding notepads, people from all corners of India. The crowd stood the moment Sundar walked in. He didn't wear a suit. He wore a simple white kurta, no bodyguards, no assistants. Just the same quiet eyes that once questioned whether he deserved an award at all. Prime Minister Narendra Modi was already on stage, waiting. But instead of the usual handshakes and speeches, he stood aside and let Sundar walk directly to the microphone. For a few seconds, Sundar said nothing. He looked over the crowd. Faces from every part of his journey stared back. Some had traveled for hours just to hear one word from him. Finally, he began. "I didn't come here to speak about technology," he said softly. "I came here to speak about a teacher." Every head turned. The cameras stayed still. This wasn't a speech, it was a tribute. Her name was Lakshmi, Sundar continued. She wasn't famous. She never went viral. She never spoke at big events, but she built more futures than I ever could. He pulled a piece of paper from his pocket. It was the second letter, folded, worn, but still whole. This letter was her last gift to me. I never read it aloud until now. And then, for the first time, he read every word. His voice didn't crack, it didn't shake, but each sentence carried the weight of someone who had finally come full circle. When he finished, there were no claps, just silence. The kind of silence that sits with you, makes you think, makes you feel. Then Sundar looked up again. "I didn't build the Lakshmi initiative for recognition. I built it because I realized something. Progress means nothing if it doesn't reach the ones who dream in silence." He paused and added, "It's easy to honor the loudest voices, but we forget the quiet ones, the ones who guide us when no one is watching. Those are the people we need to build for." Modi stood, slowly clapping. Others followed, but Sundar raised his hand gently, signaling for the applause to stop. "Today," he said, "I want to return the award I once declined, not to me, but to Lakshmi. Let it stand for every teacher who gave more than they received, for every child who studied under a tree, for every forgotten village where dreams still bloom." He stepped down, walked to a small table, and placed the national award there this time, not taking it for himself. And in that moment, the entire event changed. Modi walked up, took the mic, and said something unexpected. "We will rename this award," he said. "From today, it will be called the Lakshmi Award, for unseen service to the nation." The crowd erupted not in excitement, but in emotion. People cried. Teachers stood holding hands. Students looked at each other as if something invisible had just become visible. And yet Sundar didn't linger. After the event, he quietly exited from the side gate. No interviews, no photo sessions. Later that night, back at his small guest house, he sat alone in the courtyard under the stars. The night was still, but inside him, Something had finally settled. He remembered Lakshmi's voice in class. Don't chase success. Children, chase meaning. And for the first time in years, he felt he had listened. But something else was about to happen, something no one saw coming. Because the next morning, Sundar received a call that would change the direction of the Lakshmi initiative forever. It was just past 6 in the morning when Sundar's phone rang. The sky was still soft with early light. The air smelled like wet soil, and the streets outside the guest house were quiet. He had been awake, sitting cross-legged on the small balcony, sipping a cup of tea, watching the sunrise like he used to as a boy in Chennai. But the number flashing on his screen wasn't from India. It was from a private line in California. He hesitated for a second, then answered, "Hello." A familiar voice came through. "Sundar, it's me. Listen, I know you've been off the radar, but something big is happening." The voice belonged to one of the senior board members at Google. Someone close to Sundar, someone who knew the weight Sundar carried, but also the global power he held in his hands. "You need to check the Global Education Index," the voice continued. "What you're doing in Tamil Nadu, it's being picked up everywhere. Schools in Kenya, Peru, Indonesia, everyone is watching. They're calling it the Pichai model. And now the UN wants to meet you." Sundar didn't speak for a moment. He looked down at the empty teacup in his hand. "I didn't do this for attention," he said. "I know," the voice replied. "But what you've built is working. Governments want to learn from it. They're saying if you scale it globally, we might finally close the education gap faster than ever imagined. I'm not ready for something that big." "You don't have to be," the voice said. "Just keep doing what you're doing. But now, with help." Sundar looked at the empty street below. A small girl was walking barefoot, holding her younger brother's hand, both on their way to school. She smiled when she looked up and saw him. He smiled back, and in that moment, he made a decision. "Tell them I'll talk," he said. "But not in New York, not in Paris. Tell them to meet me here in Lakshmi's school." Within 2 weeks, the world had shifted its focus. Delegations from across the globe arrived not in fancy cars or private jets, but in shared jeeps, walking through narrow roads, just to reach a classroom that once had no roof. Reporters tried to sneak in, but Sundar kept them out. This wasn't a show. It was a conversation, under the shade of the neem tree, where students now gathered each morning. Sundar stood beside a blackboard and welcomed officials from Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia. He didn't use slides, he used stories. He spoke of Kavya, the shy girl, who now taught other students coding after school. He spoke of Arun, the boy who built a weather app that warned farmers before storms arrived. He spoke of teachers who used YouTube and smartphones to bring math to life under trees. And then he said something that silenced everyone. "We don't need billion-dollar programs," he said. "We need belief, we need listening, and we need the patience to build with, not just for the people." By the end of the week, 8 countries signed a letter of intent to replicate the Lakshmi initiative in their rural zones. But Sundar wasn't done. He made a public statement that evening. "We will open source everything," he said. "The software, the lesson plans, the teacher training guides. All of it. No patents, no licenses, just purpose." His team back in the US worked overnight. Within days, a digital library called Lakshmi Lite launched, giving free access to education, tools in more than 20 languages. Engineers volunteered. Designers created simplified apps for low-end phones. People all over the world donated old tablets and phones to rural centers. Within 2 months, villages that had no electricity now had solar-powered digital schools. And then came another surprise. Narendra. Modi returned to the school in Tamil Nadu not with cameras, but with a group of children. He sat with them on the floor, listening to their answers, watching their fingers dance over touchscreens, smiling, as they taught him how to draw digitally. Later, he turned to Sundar and said something no one expected. "We don't just need to honor this school," he said. "We need to listen to it." That week, the Indian government announced a new national program inspired by the Lakshmi initiative. The name was simple Project Sapna, meaning dream. But even as all this happened, Sundar stayed the same. Every evening, after meetings, after lessons, after video calls with teams around the globe, he walked back to the same classroom. He would sit alone for a few minutes, close his eyes, and place his hand over the spot where Lakshmi once sat, reading from old textbooks with pages falling apart. One day, a teacher found him there and asked quietly, "Do you miss her?" Sundar nodded. "Every time I see a child believe in themselves, I hear her voice." The teacher smiled and said, "Then she's not gone." But there was still one last thing left undone, something personal, something Sundar hadn't told anyone in his heart. He knew the journey wouldn't be complete until he visited the place where Lakshmi was buried. And so, one quiet morning, he packed a single flower, a printed photo of the school, and the 2 letters she wrote him, and he began walking up a hill, toward the resting place of the woman who had lit a fire in the heart of a global giant. The morning sky was quiet, painted with gentle hues of orange and blue. No reporters followed, no assistants came along. Sundar walked alone, holding only a single marigold flower, a laminated photo of the school, and 2 folded letters. That had never left his side since the moment Modi handed him the second one. The village elder had told him where Lakshmi was buried. It was not in a cemetery. It was on a hill just beyond the edge of the village, where the trees opened into a wide clearing of earth and wind. Lakshmi's final resting place had no grand stone, no statue, just a small wooden plaque carved by one of her students, buried into the soil. The name had begun to fade, but the meaning hadn't. Sundar reached the hilltop and stood still. The air was clean. Birds flew above. A soft wind moved through the tall grass. He knelt slowly, placed the marigold gently at the base of the wooden plaque, and sat on the earth cross-legged, as he once did as a child in her classroom. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, in a voice only the sky could hear, he whispered, "I came back. I kept your letters, and I'm still listening." He took out the photo, the one showing her old classroom now transformed. Walls bright with art, students working on solar tablets, a small library of books in 3 languages, and her name printed across the arch of the entrance, Lakshmi Miss, Learning Center. He placed it beside the flower, then opened the letters one final time. The first, worn and creased, carried the hope of a teacher who believed her student might one day remember her. The second, written with trembling hands, held the faith of a woman who believed he would return not for reward, but for something deeper. He didn't read them again. He didn't need to. Instead, he pulled a small notebook from his pocket, the same one where he had recorded student dreams, teacher needs, and plans for expansion. He turned to the last page and wrote, "Dear Miss, your voice is louder now. It speaks through thousands, maybe millions, and it will never fade again." He tore the page out, folded it, and buried it beneath the flower. Then he stood, brushed the dirt from his knees, and looked up at the sun as it climbed the morning sky. He didn't feel like a CEO, he felt like a student, who had finally understood the lesson. As he walked down the hill, his phone buzzed, a text from his assistant. "Wants to feature Lakshmi initiative at next General Assembly. Shall I confirm?" He replied with just 2 words, "Only if," and then followed it with another, "We include her name." Months passed. The Lakshmi initiative spread to 17 countries. Students from villages in India began students in Kenya, Ghana, and Peru sharing lessons, teaching each other their languages, showing each other their drawings and science projects. Schools once forgotten were now leading examples of low-cost, high-impact education. Every child involved had one thing in common. They knew the name Lakshmi. not as a celebrity, but as a story teacher who never stopped believing in quiet change. At the United Nations, Sundar stood at the podium, this time not as Google's CEO, but as founder of a movement sparked by a single letter. He didn't speak for long. "This is not my story," he said. "This is hers. I was just lucky enough to carry it forward." Behind him, the screen displayed the faces of thousands of students from around the world, all waving at once. The world didn't just honor Lakshmi, it learned from her back in Tamil Nadu. A new batch of students entered the school gates. Among them was a little boy named Vinesh. He had lost his parents in the floods and had never been to school before. He clutched a torn notebook, shy and unsure. A kind teacher knelt beside him and said, "Don't worry, Vinesh. Do you see that picture?" She pointed to the large mural of Lakshmi on the school wall, with Sundar's letter written beneath it in simple Tamil. "She believed every child matters," the teacher whispered, "and that includes you." The boy smiled for the first time in days. And just like that, the legacy continued. Not in speeches, not in awards, but in small moments, in silent belief. In lives changed by a teacher who taught the world's most powerful man what it truly meant to go back not for himself, but for others. And somewhere, in the soft winds of the hilltop, her spirit watched, still proud, still teaching. 2 years passed. The world had changed, but not in a loud, obvious way. It changed in quiet classrooms, on dusty village paths, and in the hearts of children who now believed their future was not limited by where they were born. The Lakshmi Initiative had become one of the most respected grassroots education movements in the world. It was now active in 31 countries, but Sundar still refused to turn it into a brand. There were no shiny logos, no photo shoots with celebrities, and no grand offices. Each new school was simply called Lakshmi Learning Center, and yet, what it represented had become bigger than any technology company ever built. Teachers in Honduras called it hope in a box. Parents in Nigeria called it light that never turns off. In India, it was simply called her gift. But Sundar had remained out of the spotlight. After his speech at the United Nations, he quietly stepped away from his CEO role at Google. He didn't announce it on stage. He just sent a short letter to the board. "My greatest title will never be CEO. It will always be student." He moved back to India full-time, built a small home near the school in Tamil Nadu, and began working directly with children and teachers, coding by day, dreaming by night. He often said, "Technology without heart is noise, but technology with heart, that's music." One evening, while helping students prepare for a science fair, Sundar received a handwritten envelope. Inside was an invitation, not from a government, not from a conference. It was from the children of the very first Lakshmi Learning Center. They had built their own small auditorium with help from their teacher and wanted to give him an award. The letter read, "Dear Sundar Uncle, you gave us internet, tablets, books, and hope. But more than that, you gave us your time. Please come, not as a guest, but as our student." Sundar laughed softly when he read that last line. The next day he walked up the same school steps where he had once returned in guilt. This time, he returned in peace. The auditorium wasn't big. Its walls were painted by the children themselves, murals of stars, rockets, trees, animals, and the words, "Dream without fear," as he entered. Every child stood up and clapped not because someone told them to, but because they felt it. They gave him a handmade award, a wooden plaque shaped like an open book. On one side, it read, "Thank you for remembering us." On the other side, "Thank you for becoming one of us." There were no cameras, no microphones, just a room full of shining eyes and hearts that knew what gratitude truly looked like. Sundar looked at the children and said, "I once thought I needed to do something big to matter. But I've learned that the smallest acts, reading a book, with you building a bench, helping you code your first app, those are the real milestones. A little girl raised her hand. Uncle, she said, you said you were a student. What did you learn? He smiled, knelt down, and replied, I learned that success is not what you take, it's what you leave behind. After the event, he walked alone through the school grounds. Beneath the neem tree, where it all began, a new plaque had been placed in the soil. It read, in memory of Lakshmi Miss, whose quiet love taught the world how to listen. And just below it, someone had written in chalk, he came back, and we never stopped dreaming. Years later, people would write books about the Lakshmi Initiative. They'd study it in universities. Leaders would quote Sundar's words in global education forums. But none of that mattered to him. He still woke up early, helped kids log into their learning tablets, planted trees in schoolyards, fixed broken chairs with his own hands, and walked barefoot when it rained. One morning a boy asked him, Uncle, will you ever win another award? Sundar smiled, looked at the classroom full of laughter, curiosity, and possibility, and answered, I already have. I win it every day. I see you smile. And as the boy turned back to his desk, Sundar stood in the corner, watching, not as a leader, not as a legend, but as a man who once refused an award until he realized the real ones don't come with applause, they come with purpose. They come with peace. They come when you go back, not to be honored, but to honor the ones who first believed in you.